I really would like to just say, don't think you're going to pre-sell it. You almost definitely won't. And I say that just so folks can start to pivot to what is worth focusing on. So, just to recap, if you have sort of names attached, that's still possibly a thing that you can pre-sell. And if without, do something else. Okay. There's also, I mean, sometimes people do co-productions with different countries in Europe or Canada, and there's all kinds of public funding outside the United States. And that's something that, some filmmakers do, but then you really need to be collaborating with producers and creators in different countries, and then that's sort of soft money. I want to, on the branding side, just to touch on that, there's someone named Brian Newman. His whole focus is pairing corporate money to content. But I mention him not so that you can go banging down his door, because he'll tell you uh, the brands have a very clear vision of what they want to pay for, and he's finding content for them, not brands for the content. Not that being said, I know firsthand that certain projects lend themselves to certain kind of support, and it's a question of just uh, having the right person on your team who's going to sort of knock on some of those doors. What I love about this conversation is that as a lawyer, I can tell you that the agreements that I do involving money for movies are the easiest. And I'm going to walk through some of the legal stuff in a bit, but because there's so many wealthy people who just want to be in this business, or just want to, if it's a documentary, just want to support the cause. So that's where I would say, if you're making a documentary, you're looking at grants and charitable donations. Almost every doc I've ever dealt with was substantially funded, not by investors, because they know the rule that most of the time they'll lose the money, and they just rather take the charitable deduction. And I'm going to go into that in a minute a little bit more. So just to walk back, there's the people who also just want to invest, whether it's a doc or uh, not like a fiction project, because they want to be in this business. They want their name on screen. They want to go to the premiere. So then it's just about, like, either enough people who have a little bit of money to put into your movie, or a few people who have enough money to put into your movie that taken together. And I just find that, like, they are not scrutinizing the agreement that much. They just want to be involved in support. So with that, I'm going to do a little bit of a dive into the legal, and then Leslie, I'll come back to you for more stuff, and then we'll go back and forth a little bit. But first things first, you can't start having people put money into your movie of any kind, whether it's without having your so-called ducks in a row. And creatives love to just get creative and not, like, get their act together legally, but it's a very dangerous way to operate. So you just have to make sure that you really have the underlying, and especially if you're dealing with more sophisticated investors or even donors, like the contracts that will make clear that you have the right to the project, right? And that means that if you're making a scripted work, and I know docs also have scripts, but whatever, you need the underlying rights agreements if it's something based on a screenplay or a book or a play or a video game. And then if it's a doc, and you need all the releases, and you need the contracts with everyone on your crew and all the service providers. If you believe in the above, below the line paradigm, the above and below. If you don't believe in the paradigm, then all the agreements, full stop. So somebody needs to be handling that work. And okay, then on the if you're getting people to invest, one thing I'd like to touch on, because I've seen this mistake happen, is people will call me and say, hey, I need a PPM, I need a private placement memorandum. And I'm like, well, why? Are you soliciting members of the public that you've never met before to invest in your movie? And the answer is almost always no. And so, and I mention this because, a lawyer should hopefully tell you what you don't need, and not take a bunch of money from you to create something that you don't need. Those are expensive packages, and they can cost you $25,000 or more, or less, depending. But so in my experience, the folks that are raising money for independent films that are costing 6 or 7 figures, but not more than 10 million, they're getting the money from people they know, or people who people who know people who are putting the money in. And then I will say, look, investing in film is a securities. I'm not a securities lawyer. I'm not that type of lawyer. But there are requirements, and one thing that you really need to do is to make sure that you're not getting money. Put it this way: if you're getting money from someone without disclosing how risky it is in a very standardized way that happens in these contracts, that investor under the Supreme Court law has the right to revoke to get their money back. So you really should be disclosing, the truth about the project, what it's really going to cost, what's really happening with the project. And I don't do legal work for folks getting money from unaccredited investors, as the IRS terms it. So what is an accredited investor? You can look this up on Google, but I'm going to tell you right now. It's someone with a net worth of over $1 million, excluding their primary residence, individually or with a spouse or partner. They have income over $200,000 individually or $300,000 with a spouse or partner in each of the 2 prior years, and would expect the same for the current year of their investment. So all this to say, and usually, I mean, it's one thing if you're crowdfunding, and Leslie touched on that, I think, a little bit, and we can do more of that. That's different. That's people giving you $100 at a time, a few $100 at a time. Maybe they're getting some swag, whatever they're getting. There's getting some cookies that you baked, whatever they're getting. But we're not talking about that. That's fine. Those are people giving you money, even though there's also equity crowdfunding that's separate. But we're talking about you're doing investment agreements with people who are giving you money in exchange for a credit, and usually ideally their money back plus what's called a premium. It's usually 20%, but it can be 10 or 15, and some sort of percentage of the back end. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that. It's important that you disclose to them that it's very, very likely they'll never see their money again, period. Never mind their premium and their back end, right? 80% of movies don't make their money back. So that those risks you have to disclose. And that's why people sometimes just donate it, right? Or they're doing it for the write-off, under the tax code. So they really need to know that they need to be able to afford to lose that money, and they need to know that there's a really good chance that they will. That being said, I'm very happy to say one of my clients who sold my soul for him, $2 million movie, he's going to make all his money back, and he's stoked because when you make all your money back for your investors, you get those people to invest again. As it turns out, it's a nice thing. So the other thing I'll touch on, and then I'll pivot back to Leslie before we get to any more boring with legal, is a lot of people also think that the investors must be members of the production company, and that's also not true. So I find the more common transaction is the investor is simply doing an agreement to put money in, get their money back, premium, and their piece of back end to the extent that the money is there, available for them under a certain waterfall with their credit, with their premier ticket, whatever they're going to get. And that's that. And, and then the last thing I'll say for now is it's so common for folks to just donate. And then the carrot for them is the tax write-off. And that's when you would have a fiscal sponsor. And we can talk more about that. But Leslie, I'm going to give some oxygen back to you.
No, I want to punctuate exactly what you said, though. It is taking money from people is risky, and you don't want to lead them down a road thinking that they're getting their money back necessarily. Like, it takes a while, even with a successful film. I'm sure even with your guy with his $2 million film, it takes a while to get it back. And sometimes you're going to see it, like you might get a tiny sale with a small MG, and you start getting like $200,000 here, and you get a small theatrical, or maybe you make $50, $60, $70, 70,000 at the box office if you're lucky. And then you go and you're going to sell it to you're going to do your electronic sell through first, where they put it up for sale on iTunes or Apple or Amazon, whatever. You make a little bit of money there. Then you go VOD, you're going to make a little money there. And then finally you'll go to a streamer, you'll make a little money there. But all this is to say is that it's a slog. You're going to get a little bit back at a time, and it takes a while. And all that stuff has to go through your clearinghouse and your clearing account, and it takes a while to come back. But to Orly's point, you get that money back for your investors, you fill up that cookie jar again, and then you get to take the cookies out. So you get to go back to all those people and say, look, we did it. Let's do it again. And usually they're happy to do it. So,
and sometimes even if they didn't make all their money back, they're happy to do it because they went to the festivals with you, and they have the money. That's the thing is, I don't know about you, Leslie. I don't see people forking over 100 grand when they don't have it, right? If they're forking over some six-figure sum of any kind or seven-figure sum, it's because they have it and they
They
have
have,
it to lose, as it were. And then it's just a question of their experience with you and their trust in you to keep doing it.
and then there's that paperwork that they fill out too, that exactly the things that you talked about that show that they qualify to be able to be an accredited investor, to be able to give you money. That there is paperwork that they have to fill out that shows that they understand that they can afford to do this and they understand the risk involved.
And I think I know we mentioned crowdfunding briefly. I mean, there are crowdfunding platforms you probably are familiar: Seed and Spark, Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Filmocracy, Slated, Patreon, Equity. There's an equity one called Nexty. There's other equity ones. By equity, I mean where. So crowdfunding is you're just getting gifts, for the film, and people are getting whatever you're promising them, a T-shirt, a credit, or whatever. Equities, like literally, they're using that same platform, but it was made legal under the Jobs Act where they could actually also have an investment interest. That's very complex, though. As soon as you start dealing with that, you're dealing with more expensive legal. So just to zoom out, I think it's a question of, okay, how much money do I need to raise? Uh, to recognize that crowdfunding doesn't do the work for you. Like, it's not like, oh, I put my film on Kickstarter and Seed and Spark and now boom, I raised 100 grand. No, it's a question of how good are you at social media? Or is there someone on your team who's doing that work? And incentivizing people, chasing them down. I have a colleague who just raised about 40 grand that way. It took a lot of work, even 40 grand. So people have different ways. Some people just know a lot of wealthy people. Some people have wealthy family and they just get some checks written. Other people have to hustle in other ways. I think it's also about coming up with the plan that makes sense for your film. One last little tip on that, just like general fundraising front, is if you're really feeling like my film should attract wealthy donors, uh, you could also just look at who's getting credits on films that relate to your film, right? If you're making a documentary about a certain subject matter, take a look at the credits for all the other docs about that subject matter and see which grants they got, who put money in, and start making some relationships and see if you can get access to some of those funds. It's just a note, because there are people who routinely give money to certain kinds of work.
Well, and to that also with documentaries, and if you're going out to get grant money, or you're going to go to some of these companies like Impact Partners, you have to they want to know what your outreach campaign is going to be. So it's having a solid plan before you start calling anybody. It's exactly what you said. You have to have all your ducks in a row. You need a solid business plan. You have to know what your outreach campaign is going to be if there's social impact involved. And you want to have all that stuff lined up and buttoned up before you make that first phone call to your wealthy donors or studios or whomever that you're going after for money.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think with the wealthy folks, it just depends on how many times they've already invested in film. Some of them are more sophisticated than others. I just dealt with clients who have, someone who regularly invests in film and are acquiring, some really complex legal instruments, security interest. Sometimes it's going to also cost you more legally to get that money because actually you are dealing with sophisticated parties. I mean, people who have a knowledge about film and who are in the business. It's funny though, every era, there are different categories of people who put money in film. I think it was like dentists in the 80s, and then like real estate folks in the 90s, and then .com folks made in the 2000s. And, then of course it's tech now. But so it's just um, different people have different types of approaches. And so it's also just like making a plan that makes sense for you. And that's where I think, again, like look into case study. I mean, I think if you're seeing films that you're like, hey, I like that film. It looks like a similar budget level. They seem to have had success. Reach out to those filmmakers too. I mean, that's some of the work as well. Like, what worked for you in getting your film made. My only big pet peeve is people assuming that their path is going to be the same as that of someone who had, A-list celebrities or premiered at Sundance, and different things. Different films have different trajectories because they have different components.
I think to that end, movies are getting harder and harder to fund now. I mean, the entire industry is a bit upside down, and everybody's trying to find their path and figure out their way. And that's why I think that there's a huge opportunity right now to sort of disrupt the marketplace and find a new path to getting this stuff done. But at the same time, it's so much harder because the we're fighting the algorithms. People want to watch content that reflects their lives. I mean, that's what we're attracted to, right? Art imitates life, and we are attracted to things that reflect our lives. But when the streamers are checking boxes and following an algorithm, you lose all the heart in it. And that's when independent films are just like dying. There's so many great movies out there right now that you will never see because they were little indies that went the film festival route that you'll never see them because they never got to the streamers or, and it's just sad. And nobody's going to the movies anymore. And we have to figure out how to get the butts back in the seats. And so it's just riskier and riskier for everybody, for the studios, for private investors alike. It's just hard. And that's why, so I've got projects right now where I'm looking at like, okay, how am I going to shake the money tree? Where is it going to come from? And just because of my experience in advertising, I've been really lucky that I've got 3 different projects right now where I'm able to go to brands to get funding. And one of them is an unscripted series, and you never know like the brand involved in it it's not obvious. They're looking for different ways to reach their target demographic as well. And they're looking to sell an idea to that demographic. And so I just happen to be able to know how to speak advertising and know how to navigate into that world to shape that money tree. But it's different. And same with the feature doc that we're doing with the athlete. It was just like, the brand actually came to us. That was lucky, but it's an interesting way that I think that it might be something. I mean, television sort of started that way back when it was brought to you by, Clorox or whatever.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah. And then and maybe there's in a weird way we're kind of going back to that and finding our way back to that. There's also really interesting things happening right now with like the TVs that are having their own channels. Like I don't know if you guys when I turn on my Samsung TV, it automatically turns on to its own Samsung channel, even though
LG does the same thing. Yeah.
my little thing goes across the bottom that has my Max and my DirecTV and my whatevers. So all those platforms, they're offering free content. They're trying to get you to watch their channel. And there was an interesting thing that happened with Roku and a brand and a production company that happened to be helmed by a famous person. I don't know if I'm allowed to say things, so I'm just being vague. But anyway, so an interesting thing happened. So the production company and the brand got together, and the brand financed this show. And then they sold it to Roku because Roku needed the content. And then Roku wanted more named stars in it. So then Roku kicked in a bunch of money so that they could then have the financing to be able to pull the stars in. And this was for a TV project. But it was a really interesting model. And those are the kinds of things like these things are going to start happening now, where you're going to see alternative models to getting shows and getting films made. And I think we're going to see something interesting happening with LG, with Samsung, with these TV brands that have their own channels that they need to bring content to. And whether they're licensing movies that have been done already or they're putting money into new content, I think there's going to be some interesting things happening there as well.
And I want to pick up something you said about sports, because actually it's just, I'm remembering other clients that I've had in the past. One of them also had a background in advertising and also had a sports doc, and she sourced corporate, brand support for that. Someone else I know had a running doc and of course secured support from a sneaker brand. I think at the same time, it's important to remember, like, it doesn't mean that if you're making a doc about your grandmother, you can't find maybe AARP or, there's other, but that stuff all takes, like AARP takes a lot of work to get that kind of to get their money. Whatever you're pursuing, uh, it should be well thought out, and it shouldn't just be because something that's completely different did something. It should be that there's a reason that it makes sense for your project, and that you know really know that it takes time. I mean, Leslie, tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, brands usually have their budgets, you know, well in advance, and their money allocated. So you need to really get ahead of it.
Absolutely. Actually, to that, I will say I have a show that I was like, oh, I know exactly who would be right for this. Uh, the person who happens to run the part that I'm trying to get the money out of, I know them well, called them up and they said, oh, we're on a fiscal year. So we're actually meeting in this fall for our next fiscal year. Their fiscal year is from June to June. I'm like, perfect, because I actually don't even want to shoot this until then. So I'm gonna get in front of it with you right now so that you can build me into your budget and know how that's going to work. So yes, you want to get way out in front of it, especially with them because their money is allocated in a very specific way and it's use it or lose it money a lot sometimes as well. And if you're lucky, you can get in at the end of their year and they still have money left over. But a lot of times that money is spent way before they get to the end and you were trying to get into their next year. So those are absolutely good points to make.
And I just revisited my little outline that I went off script on, and just to uh, touch on a couple things. First off, I didn't mention loans. So, you know, people get loans, but you know, loans come with interest usually, and there's also the concern of whether there's a security interest, meaning that they have like a, it's almost like a mortgage. It is like it is so on your project, so that be cautious about that. And I've seen filmmakers take, you know, max out their credit cards, and you know, take a second mortgage, speaking mortgages on their house, and you know, don't do that if you can help it, because or just know that you might really lose your house, and you might really max out your credit cards and lose your credit score. So I get it. Everyone's passionate, wants to make their film. It's just whatever your choice is, just make sure you're doing them with a full deck of information and perspective. You know, and then I think it sort of begs the question of like, before you sit there and commit yourself to making this project, it's like, you know, what's the path here? It's interesting that there's money for impact now too, but that's usually more for docs than not, unless the non-doc project had a real, you know, lend itself to impact. It's just, you know, yeah, what is the path? As long as you're not making assumptions that your film is going to make as much money as another project for absolutely no good reason, and that you're going to get into Sundance and sell big, like those, right? If you're starting to like do a budget, make a commitment to making a film, the business aspect, the financial aspect has to be somebody's job to really be thoughtful about, and to have a real vision of that, you know, from beginning to end, because you're also gonna have to disclose it to your investors.
Well, that's kind of leading us into this other thing that I wanted to touch upon is when you're raising money for your film, I feel like so many people get lost and get trapped in I'm going to raise, I need $2 million to make my movie. And you get your $2 million and you make your movie. And then what? Now people need to see it. And they forget that there's also a huge amount of marketing that you need to raise some marketing money as well. So if your plan is to take your film out the festival route, and ideally, like you get into Sundance, you get into Tribeca, you get into TIFF, and you think you're going to sell it there, and we're going to be that big sale. I mean, God, we all hope that we're going to be that big sale, right? But sometimes we're not. I had a film premiere at Tribeca last year. Not one movie sold out of Tribeca because it was the end of the strikes. The whole industry was upside down, and it was like, oh, we thought we'd have it, and we didn't. And then we did end up getting, finally selling it, getting it with a distributor. And then the distributor was a small distributor, and they have been great and a great partner to us in getting the film out there. But they're also very limited in what they're going to do and how they're going to market it. So I went out, and AMC has, we all know like Taylor Swift and Beyonce put their concerts out there. So I'm like, maybe they'll make a movie, maybe they'll take my movie, right? So I reached out to AMC, And lo and behold, they do have a a part of their company because they're trying to save the whole theatrical thing. You can submit your film to AMC. They have a whole independent thing. You have to have a marketing plan. They want to know what you're thinking. And I submitted to them and they took it. And instead, if it was going to be by the plan of the distributor, we were only going to be in a few independent theaters on New York and LA. But because I got AMC involved, then suddenly we were opening in 36 theaters, 36 cities. So it just changed everything. And then it would have gone bigger and bigger, except then they need the P&A. They wanted to know that the distribution company was going to put more money into, traditional advertising around the film by buying, TV time for trailers or whatever they were doing. We did a ton of work ourselves. I put together a whole internal marketing team on top of what the distribution company had. We had a huge social media campaign going. This was a massive effort. It takes time, it takes money, and it's just like all of these things are things that you have to think about and put into your film for it to be successful.
I'm so glad you said that, and I think it's a good note for us to then transition to questions because actually, Film Collaborative, which has been around since the end of '09, that's one of our things is like, and now what, right? It's like everyone hustled to make their film. And, John Reese has been saying this, like raise enough money, raise another 10-20%, depending on what your budget is, to actually effectively premiere your film and to, uh, even if you get a distributor, because distributors don't usually spend a lot of money, and so whatever it is, whether it's self-distribution or adding, support for the distribution through a distributor, again, it's like the business plan for the film, and it cannot be we're going to get into Sundance and sell big because very few people do that, especially now. Not to be Debbie Downer, but on the upside, there's like 100 Beavers, and there's like wonderful examples of film. Okay, that's a very relatively low budget film, but there are films that are doing great business. Some films that people never heard of. That's why we have case studies. We have distribution case studies on the Film Collaborative's website. We had something called distribution day. Like that's where it's like, let me just figure out where my film is creatively in the landscape and from a business perspective in the landscape, and like see what's possible now, not what's possible in 1995. And that's when you can start to really then, even if you're ultimately less successful financially than you would have liked to be, at least that you did everything you could, and it just helps you with the next one. Because that's the other piece is like, again, back to where we started. Once investors are told the honest truth, which is it's very likely you will not make your money back, they can't say you didn't tell them. And then if you've made a good film and you did what you told me you would do with it, and you gave them what you said you'd give them from it, it's not only financially if you couldn't accomplish it, but everything else, their credit, whatever their experience, you'll find that that's rewarding for them, and they'll come back to you.
That's true. And actually, you want to be as transparent and just have your investors, they're part of your team because things can go sideways during production. You raise that $2 million and then something happens and now you need another couple $100,000 to get you to the finish line. Those people, if they know what's doing, you're lockstep with them the whole way, you keep them informed and they feel like they're part of it, they're invested in it. I mean, literally and figuratively, they're a part of this and they will help you find those solutions, especially when it comes to money. So be transparent and just be lockstep with them the whole way.
I think we're good, right? I think we should take questions now. I don't know, Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, let me chime in actually. We have a lot of questions. So people are excited, by the way. Some people said that they're watching now from Germany, from New York, from London. So we're so happy to see you all here
Guten
today.
Tag. Good. No,
Uh,
it's nighttime there. Never mind. What I was thinking. Sorry. Good Nacht.
so we have a couple of questions that are upvoted on the top. The first one would be, who do you typically approach at a company brand for financial support? This one has like the top
Well, for
number
the
of
brands, it's different every time. It just sometimes I have a show where UTA's brand department is helping us with that part of it. So sometimes you're going to go through your agent and it's going to happen that way. And in another case, I was saying that the brand actually came to me. So they knew that we were doing this and they came to me and said they want to get involved and finance it. And I'm like, yes, please. And then in another case, I went to the VP of what is her title exactly? It's at an agency and like an advertising agency, and she's the head of I don't even know what her exact title is. She's the head of something, but she's the one who is dealing with the film and advertising, the content part of the agency. And so I went to her and pitched this thing, and that's when she said, "Oh, this is great. We would totally get involved." And actually said, "We're getting ready to do our fiscal year budget," and wanted me to give her certain materials, but said, "No matter what, for sure, I can hook you up with all the lodging that you guys would need. I can connect you with it's an unscripted project. So they could connect me with um, the like vendors that we're featuring. They could connect me with all of them. They would provide all our lodging. So there was a lot of in-kind stuff that just takes our budget down. So even if they weren't writing me a check, they were taking care of so many of the costs that's a huge part of it too. So sometimes that kind of thing can happen. So so they were saying at the very least, we know we can give you this, and then, but we want to put this in the budget and get the money for you too. So it hopefully that answers your question.
Another great question here. So they're wondering if you could touch on some red flags to look out from individuals and groups promising financing.
Oh my God. I'll take that one. Well, I mean, I'm all about red flags in distribution contracts and sales contracts. Um, I think, you know, someone who promises, okay, I have to tell you guys a story. It's crazy. A client came to me and was like, oh yeah, like this one guy, he's going to fund two of our projects, one for 1 million, one for 9 million. He's going to fund both completely. I was like, really? I've never seen that happen before. Uh, we drafted the agreements for them. We had nothing to do with securing this person or vetting them. And sure enough, they like have some kind of syndrome where they like basically compulsively lie and had no money at all to do this. And it was very devastating for these filmmakers. You know, so I think uh, that's where you just want to know who you're dealing with. But at the same time, like don't start counting on that money until it's in the bank, right? And so bottom line, that, because things can change. And, I said this earlier in the presentation that I'm very thrilled about the fact that most of the time, the agreements that take the least amount of time to deal with are those investment agreements because it's rich people who are busy who are not doing this for money. They're doing it for other reasons. And so they're like, yeah, whatever, all good, with some exceptions. So hopefully that's the situation you're in, but you're not going to sit there and tell them, show me proof of funds. Your agreement is going to make clear that they're only entitled to whatever they're getting if they send the money, and you're not going to move forward relying on that money until it's in the bank. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. You want to know who you're getting in bed with. And so and sometimes it just takes time to vet that. And so people will say all kinds of things and promise all kinds of things, and it sounds great. But until that money is in the bank, it's not real. It's not real until like they've signed the contract, the money's in the bank. And do not greenlight your movie on promises. You have to have that money in the bank, because even with that money in the bank, stuff can go sideways.
And even if they sign the contract, what are you going to do if they don't send you the money? You're going to sue them. Like you're not going to extract it from them. So both things have to be true: the agreement signed and the money there.
Yeah.
All right, another question here about, well, there are two about getting an actor attached to a script before before the movie's financed. How do you approach that? So the issue of packaging in general.
I'll say something and then Liz, I'm sure you have thoughts. So that is that chicken and egg or whatever catch 22 thing that people deal with. So I always say like because if it's a kind of actor at the level that with them attached you can raise the money, then they can sort of sign an agreement of like an intent provided there's the money, and then their reps are not going to let them make a commitment without proof of funds and putting money in escrow. But you can sort of, I've seen that done, right? Okay, so you show me that you have this intent. I will use that to get the money. The money will be contingent on the talent, and the talent will be contingent on the money. But that's the way it works in that order, because you're not going to sit there and give them you're not going to have the money to put in escrow or to give them a pay or play offer, which is also something you try to avoid if you don't have the money.
And getting them to read the scripts is also its own challenge. So if you're trying to get like, hopefully you have a great relationship with the agent or manager or the talent themselves and you can get them to read it, then amazing. And exactly what Orly said, you can get that intent paper and and try to get financing on that. Sometimes you might have an investor, like maybe you have $200,000 or something, and they sometimes to get them to read, they want to know that you have some money in the bank, and you have to have the money in the bank to make an offer to them for the part if you're so sure about them. This is a way riskier way to do it. So let's say that person's role is going to cost $200,000 and you have your $200,000 in the bank from an investor and it's there specifically for this talent. You could make an offer. It'll get them to read it faster and then they'll say yay or nay. And then they know that you're going to have to raise the rest of the money based on their name. I mean, I've seen that done too. Not ideal at all. Just saying that's another way that I've seen it done.
I do think there's that issue of just like the gatekeeping that happens with folks reps, and that's where again it's about, like you said, Leslie, like the relationships with the reps. I think I've heard of people like making it rain with talent by just through social media, but I think it's again just about like who you are, what you're about, who's paying attention to you about what, and
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had luck just going to having good relationships with the agents or managers and getting them to get the talent to read the script and then getting them attached exactly how you said it and then going to try to raise money off of that. So.
All right. Another question about the profit share for investors. So if an investor gives you 20% of the budget, what share would they get of any profits?
Okay, so I'm not going to answer that as if there's just one answer. So I'll tell you one typical formulation, but then I'll tell you something else. Most typical formulation is half of so there's only 100% of net proceeds, and don't call it profits because there's a lawsuit all about profits, so we just call it proceeds, just to avoid any drama. So there's only 100% of what's the net proceeds to your production company from all the the exploitation of the rights. And the most typical formulation is half of that goes to everyone on the creative side, cast, producing team, director, everybody on the creative side, to the extent that whoever's allocating those points is doing so. And the other half is being divided up amongst all the investors based on their proportional share of the money that's been invested. And this is something that people play with because sometimes some of the money is soft money, so only some of it's invested. Sometimes people are on both sides of it. They're both on the investment side and the creative side. Different things can happen. You can just decide, hey, I'm just going to let all the investors only have 30% and I'm going to divide it up in this way. Or I need to give my early money, my first investor, better terms. Usually the first money is the hardest money. So, it's not just one way. There's different ways. And I think it's good to think through the situation that you're in and whether you want to just follow the strict typical formulation or you want to adjust it in some way based on how you're going to finance your film, how many people are going to expect some profit participation. And then the other important thing to remember is most people will never see a dollar. There's no such thing. Most movies, again, don't even make their money back, let alone have any net proceeds or profits. So don't have people expect to actually see cash, because they should know better, and so should you.
All
I
right.
think I asked someone who's an exec at Paramount. He said in 100 years, 2 films at Paramount saw a piece of the back end.
Wow.
Dare we
Uh,
ask which ones?
I'm not gonna tell you. You can guess.
yeah,
Don't tell
that
me.
would be
Don't
yes,
say it out
great.
loud.
I was,
That
I
would
I
be
was,
just
great.
realized this is being recorded. I shouldn't have named this to you. Edit.
A big studio.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe 2 more questions. So the first one on the top right now is, what are the best practices for general networking when it comes to financing?
ooh, that one's, I don't, best practices, huh? I
Or
don't
what do
know.
you do, Leslie? I mean, what's your networking?
Yeah, do you go
I
to
always
these
feel like
film
I'm the worst
festivals for that,
networker.
maybe?
You know what? I always feel like there's just no rhyme or reason to the way anything goes. It's just, you meet people and okay, I like to think like begets like. And so I just always try to, I'm always honest and forthright, and I'm a champion. I'm always like rooting for the underdog, and I get out there and I try to do good by people, hoping that people are going to do good by me. I mean, it's just the way I live my life. And so, I mean, I've seen people out there who are totally like bada bing, bada bang out at events and networking and stuff. And I'm like, God, I'd like that just, I'm the worst one at that. I love to go have a good time. I love meeting people, but I don't, I do it, I try to do it from a more genuine place. And I think when you have genuine relationships with people, then people genuinely want to help you get to your end goal, help you find, like introduce you to that person that's going to get you to the things that you're trying to do. And that's my answer. How
I
about
think
you,
that's
Laura?
good advice. I mean, I'm not in that position. I mean, I get asked to help people find money all the time, and I can only do so much, and I'm not someone who devotes myself to finding money, because I'm not interested in that. But I will say that what I see, I will say, I should have said this earlier. I have not met a filmmaker who really wanted to get their film made who didn't accomplish that with just simply determination and creativity, which filmmakers have usually both in spades. And I think it's just also about like knowing who your audience is, like knowing what motivates them. And it might not be the same thing. Some people might really care about supporting a certain kind of creator. Some people may care about a certain issue. Some people may care about a certain experience. And so I think it's just figuring out like what's going to motivate people to invest in your project, and it ultimately in you. And I mean, there's some people who started out without big reputations in this business, and Christopher Nolan, his first film cost $24,000, was black and white. And now look at him. So you could always also try, if you're really a visionary, you could say, look, everyone's got to start someplace, and if, you work with me, and I'll keep inviting you to be part of all my projects. I'm going places. Come ride with me. Maybe that does it. I don't know. But don't be smarmy. I'm with Leslie on that. Like, be honest, because in this business, your reputation will follow you, and you'll never lose it. So there's no, have a good one, and it'll work for you.
Yeah.
All right, and final question today. So, any specific suggestions for animated features versus, well, standard live action features and like generally kids content? Is it easier to find financing for that? Is it more difficult? Someone said they take longer than live action docs to create and generally maybe more expensive, but can be more evergreen. What do you think about that?
I think
Yes,
all that's true. Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead, Leslie.
I would say yes, evergreen for sure. Yes, they take longer to make for sure. I don't have experience in animation, so I don't know how to answer that question. But well, Orly, you were ready to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, just I do have a little bit. I mean, it is more expensive, and I'm dealing with a client now. But I think the good news is where that's where co-productions out of Europe and Asia are possible. Also, then you'd reduce costs if you're doing the animation in certain places versus other places. And I think that's where to start thinking out of the box in terms of financing that way. Also, I mean, kids content is so lucrative. I mean, Moonbug, the folks. I mean, there's so much content that they create, and G Kids, and so there's also just to look at like who's making that kind of content or the content that would align with what I know I to see, and maybe go to some of those companies to, I mean, Cartoon is a client of mine where they make more like adult animation. I mean, like sex animation, but for animation for adults. So I think that's where, it takes longer and it can cost a lot more money, but because it's a great category in terms of the business of it, it also provides a lot of opportunities. Just have to research.
With kids content, I've seen a lot of stuff springboard off of like off of YouTube where people are creating their own shows, and then they start to build an audience because kids love that, and then they're able to then sell it to a big company.
Yeah, I
And
mean, like I know Blippi's not animation,
I was gonna
although
say Blippi. It's exactly what I
my
was gonna
God, the
say.
guy's like was worth like 60 million bucks before he sold his thing to Moonbug, and now he doesn't even have to work. It's somebody else's Blippi. Yeah, and so there's a lot of money in that content, and if you create a following, if you got a following, then that's back to what we started off saying earlier on the legal side. Then have your ducks in a row. Don't be collaborating with animators who will then own the copyright to their drawings, to their illustrations, to their animation, if you didn't have them work on a work made for hire basis. So make sure if you want to build things slowly, you really need the rights to be vested in your production entity, or else you're going to be in a world of hurt.
Way to bring it full circle.
Boom.
All right, thank you so much for that. It was really, really helpful, I think. We are going to send you all a recording from that webinar in the next few days. We also would love to invite you to our next webinar, which is going to be on AI tools that improve your creative process. That's going to be on September 11 at 6 p.m. I think I sent also the link in the chat if anyone wants to sign up today. And if you want to try out our full script assessment, you can use the webinar 10 promo code to check it out and let us know your feedback for sure. Thank you so much, Leslie, Orly, and thank you so much everyone for joining.
And thank you, Matt and H. Thanks, guys.